everyone. Welcome to Unity in the Heart of Austin here at Casa de Luz, and hello to everyone there on Zoom also. We're so grateful to have you with us. My name's Teresa Attia, and I will be your platform leader today. Also, we have our lesson today brought to us by Reverend Don Seiler. And this is going to be part 2 of a 3-part series. And today is romantic and other relationships. And today, our song leader and musician today is the lovely Leanne Atherton. Woo! So before we have our welcome song, let's have an opening prayer with Don. He's going to lead us in that.
We've joined together in this space, recognizing that our togetherness, our oneness, extends beyond this room into the community and throughout this planet Earth. From this place of oneness, let us acknowledge the challenges that our neighbors are experiencing at this time. Folks who are dealing with the earthquake in Turkey and Syria, folks who are dealing with an attack on their country in Ukraine, folks in this room who are dealing with health challenges, who have loved ones who are dealing with health challenges. We come from a place of prayer and faith that all beings may be well, that all beings may be healthy, that all beings may live in safety. We're grateful for that one presence and one power that we call God, who offers that opportunity for all of us. From this place of gratitude, let's say thank you. Thank you, God.
Thank you, God.
Thank you, God. Thank you, God. Amen.
Amen. Somebody let Leanne. Hey, Leanne's gonna sing our welcome song.
If they remember what it is.
All right.
So glad you're here.
Yeah,
So glad you're here. The fellowship is sweeter just knowing you're near. It's so good to see you. I hope that it's clear. Everyone loves you. We're so glad you're here. So glad you're here. Yes, we're so glad you're here. The fellowship is sweeter just knowing you're near. It's so good to see you. I hope that it's clear. Everyone loves you. We're so glad you're here. Yes, everyone loves you. We're so glad you're here.
So greet your friends and neighbors with a hug or a handshake, and we'll say hi, y'all, to everyone on Zoom. Glad you're here. Don't want to leave you alone, but give yourself a little hug too. Show yourself love. Okay, so now we're going to gather for our affirmations. Here at Unity, we use affirmations as a tool to create a reality. So first, we're going to affirm our prosperity. And if you say it together with me, together, God is my instant, constant, abundant source of supply. I am blessed with health, wealth, happiness, wisdom, love, and success. Very good. Thank you. And now we're going to affirm our vision for our spiritual community. And say it together. With our thoughts, words, and actions, we make a powerful and positive difference in Austin, Texas, and in our world. So now we're going to have another song with Leanne Atherton.
It's a congregational song, so it's
Congregational
everybody's
song.
job to sing this one. 1, 2, he got the whole world in his hands. He got the whole wide world in his hands. He got the whole world in his hands. He got the whole world in his hands. She's got the little bitty baby in her hands. She got the little bitty baby in her hands. She's got the not so bitty baby in her hands. She got the whole world in her hands.
Debbie said, would you like to speak? Would you like to speak 3 weeks in a row? And I said, heck yeah. And then I said, it's Love Month. I'll just do a series. And every week since I said yes, I've been saying, holy cow. I mean, this whole love stuff is really, really hard. It shouldn't be. It shouldn't be, but it's really difficult. Last week, I leaned into a little bit of politics, maybe more politics than people want to hear. But I want to share something that happened during the week about politics. I have a friend, very liberal friend, and she texted a photo of a member of the folks who are not so liberal at the State of the Union address. And that picture compared her shouting face to a baboon. And I thought, this is the same woman who talks about certain churches being hypocritical. This woman who talks about how things that go on at the border should be based on love and caring about other human beings. And yet she decided that the best thing for her to do was to compare a human being to a baboon. And so what it reminds us of, again, this stuff is hard because you could justify that if you disagree with that woman's politics or her approach to politics. However, then does that allow her to have any kind of approach or way of talking about your approach to politics or your space in the political world? And by the way, when people say, oh, it's just politics, the thing we have to understand is politics is how we choose as a crowd of folks here in Austin, here in Texas, here in the United States, in the world. That's how we decide to treat each other. And so it is important to me that we make those decisions. And it would be pretty darn cool if it could be based on agape love, but I'm not holding my breath for that outcome. Not from. Are we? Let me see. We're gonna see if Don can do this with a PowerPoint. Again, the reason I'm talking about everyday love is the fact that I would like to consider bringing this idea of love into every single thing we do all day long, including driving around in traffic or going on Twitter and what we choose to say and agree with on Twitter. So that's the idea of everyday love. It's not
cute.
moving forward.
Super cute.
There we go. Well, if that doesn't work, I can do this thing with the laser and get cats to chase around the floor. So what we're trying to, if you could just click to the next one, that would be fabulous. Last week, we talked a little bit about this idea of agape love. Agape love is the love of God. That's an unconditional love. It's the love that we can have for each other when that love comes from the Christ. When it comes from the Christ. One of the challenges is, and we do this all the time, we talk about namaste and namaste. By the way, what people tell you about namaste is mostly that it really means hello. Doesn't have a whole lot to do with the Christ within or anything else, but we add that in, or the Buddha within. It doesn't have anything to do with the Buddha within either, but it's kind of a cool story, and it feels good to say namaste and make people think that you're saying that, but it's okay, because the real issue for us is not whether or not I say namaste, or the Christ in me greets the Christ in you, or the Buddha in me greets the Buddha in you. The real thing that matters is what we see when we see another. And the real challenge that we all have, every one of us has, is that the first things we see is not the Christ. We see a human being. And for whatever reason, there tends to be some kind of judgment around that. what color hair you have, what color eyes you have, whether you have a mask on during the pandemic, or whether, or the color of your skin, or how you're dressed. We make those kinds of decisions before we ever get a chance to talk about the Christ within or think about that. And so I offer that we can begin to consider during this month, and actually I'll plug this a minute. I'm going to do a follow on to this in March, starting in March, about practice. The Buddhists, when the abbot in the Buddhist Sangha that I'm a member of in Santa Fe, when she says goodbye, she'll say, goodbye, but she also says, thank you for your practice. Not thank you for being who you are, not thank you for being this or being that, but thank you for your practice. So imagine if you practice that agape love every day. Not that you necessarily did it, but because you got to think and be mindful of what's going on in order to even practice it. Because when you walk past someone, if you're loving, if you're coming from a place of love, you will think about that person down there that says, once I was like you. And you make a conscious decision, not just to feel compassion, but perhaps to take action or not take action. And I'm not saying either one is right or wrong, because there are a lot of conversations to be had about the best thing to do with folks who are homeless and asking for money. So we can have those conversations, but that mindful love is going to say, what should my response be? Not just a knee-jerk response, and not just a shouting response across an aisle at somebody who's wearing a certain color hat or a certain t-shirt. Those are the choices in practice. And that's what I think when we get into everyday love, that's the practice. And again, when we talk about relationship, are we going to try this one more time? Oh goodness.
Now it works.
There we go. That works. There we go. We also talked about romantic love. Charles Fillmore had some interesting things about that. If you ever want to know about how much the world has changed since Charles Fillmore wrote his books, one of his conversations about the 12 powers of man, he says that the courting period, which of course that's kind of an old-timey thing to say, the courting period is much easier to have a purity of love because lust hasn't entered the equation yet. And I don't know about you guys, but I'm not sure that may be a late 20th century thing, but I believe lust enters the equation fairly early in the courting game, even if you're doing that modern swipey thing. So I think, so I think we know that there's some attention being paid and judgment being made way before we walk down an aisle and get married. So it's where we're going, and the reason I'm mentioning these three particular ideas about love is that what they all lead to, this affectionate love, what they all lead to is our relationships. The idea, when we think about human beings, when you light up when you see somebody come in the room, perhaps that you thought was new, like, and you say, wow, a new guy. And we saw him last week. And we said, and last week we got to say, wow. But you see, the cool thing about that reaction was, wow, here's somebody new, somebody I don't know yet.
Yeah.
Somebody I haven't met. And then somebody perhaps who hasn't been here in a while, and you say, oh, wow. In the most exciting parts of our lives come from relationship. They come from relationship. People that we see once a year at a reunion or something. It's just something magic about connecting the past and being reconnected about whatever it is, the reunions. So the the close romantic relationship you may have is really, really special. Some of us have had more than one of those. And some of us, and some of us have never really had a really close romantic relationship. I have friends who've been married a very long time, and I'm not sure that they have one of those really close romantic relationships. Their relationships work in the way that they work. That's the other part of this, is relationships are never the same. My marital relationship cannot be the same as yours and yours and yours and yours. It's just not that way. There's choices in who we are and how we were raised. What I always say about what preachers, teachers, and parents told us, kind of hang in there in terms of how we get into relationships. So the idea of a mother and a child, the idea of two people who are in love with each other, a group of friends who have just been out for a walk. Those kinds of relationships are powerful. But boy, relationships can go the other way too, can't they? They can be the source of the greatest pain in our life as relationships break apart, or where we try to maintain relationships when there really never should have been a relationship in the first place. Oops. When I look at the idea that it's an expression of God, that's the love part of it. But the relationship part of it becomes something entirely different, because it becomes an expression. It becomes an expression usually of personality. And personality is made up of everything we've lived through that we bring into that relationship. If you've had a history of bad relationships at work, we're talking a little bit about teaching. People who have had relationships in their teaching world that are not wonderful. They may have a good example. Good example is my sister, who followed me in high school. Same last name. Teacher says, "Oh, you're Don Seiler's sister." "Yes, I am." "Sit right here, please." So the history of his relationship kind of went on to become the relationship my sister had, and she was really sad about it and has not forgiven me yet. But when we look at those relationships again, we think about those of you who don't know who this is. This is Tina Turner, and that's her husband, Ike. Wow. Tina sang a song about what's love got to do with it. Mm-hmm. And that whole song really had a different flavor to it once we knew that Ike was a very abusive partner to her. And yet she stayed for a very long time before she was able to claim herself as being important, or more important than the relationship. Things happen, and they happen over time, or they happen quickly. Anybody watch White Lotus? It's a very interesting comment on our times and expectations in relationship and people of privilege, and how their expectations might be different than folks that are not privileged. Well, there are a lot of things going on in these pictures. First of all, people are arguing at work. Somebody decided the best way to get the point across was to stand up while everybody else was sitting down. A lot of things can be read into that picture, and we're not sure what they actually mean. But that work relationship is critical for you to make a living. As an example, you've got to be able to get along with folks that you work with that are illegal. I'm talking about people who exert some authority of position or exert their opinion into every single thing that go on, and try to ensure that their opinions are the ones that are paid attention to. A lot of things about that, but we'll talk a little bit more about that. And then, of course, things that start very early on for us is our relationship with other children and the way we're treated. And when I talked about how there's a judgment, are you white, blonde, whatever it is about you that someone sees, those are can be very painful memories and get in the way of relationship. For orthodontia, I can tell you some painful stories that happened as a third, fourth grader, but they always are there. And the truth of our ability to love comes from getting connected and loving ourselves beyond because it's important to think about this. How well do we love ourselves if you look in the mirror and say, I see the Christ in you?
Yeah.
And you see wrinkles, gray hair, or whatever you see that you don't want to see. Linus Van Pelt had a great answer to everything. He said, I love mankind. It's just people I have a problem with. And it's so easy, isn't it, to sit in this room and proclaim your love for everybody. I love everybody. And then what happened to me when I left here, when I talked about love? I pulled out onto the street, out of the parking lot, and there were two people standing in the middle of the street deciding to have a discussion about what a fine Sunday it was. Don't you know that I got up early to drive from San Antonio? Don't you? So as soon as I walked out of the door talking about agape and all this love stuff, here's these two people who decided that they were special. I mean, I had all kinds of things that ran through my brain. And I had to get to I-35 before I could even realize what a dummy I was thinking all those things after I'd said other things in here. It's really, really easy to go there because, you know, my wife was saying it. She said, how do you even talk about God's love? How do you talk about Fillmore saying the true love is when we see the good everywhere? She said, how do you even go there? How do you? And I said, you know, I think it's because I want to go there. And I realize that I have to practice. So what actually happened, I can think about this now as I tell this story. What happened? People gave me the opportunity to love them no matter what. I didn't. But by the time I got to 35, I recognized that I had not practiced well. So that's a little better. But it is how it works for us. As we listen to somebody at work who perhaps is just saying the same thing he said last week or she said yesterday over and over and over again, hoping they will get their way. And we go through that and how we react and respond. By the way, there are folks that talk about how we have to learn to respond and not react. The problem is that everything gets a reaction. Our practice is what we do with that reaction. You may have a fleeting moment of anger, or you may have a longer moment of anger, or you may have a bit of anger that goes on and on and on and on, and then you begin to have problems. So it's waiting for a response is very, very difficult. The people in the street when I'm trying to get home. There was a reaction, not a response. I need to be able to have a quicker response. So I was going to talk about the 5 love languages, and I want to briefly mention this. Some of you guys may have heard about the 5 love languages, and I just want to tell you a couple things that I've taught the 5 love languages probably 10 or 12 times over the past 15 years. The Love Languages, a book written by Gary Chapman. He's written a whole bunch of other books, Love Languages in the Bible, Love Languages in Teens. The whole idea is that you notice how someone you are close to, it could be a romantic partner, could be people at work, how they demonstrate affection. So the ways they may demonstrate affection are words of affirmation, quality time, physical touch, acts of service, or giving or receiving gifts. So what we're telling people is as an example, I shared this, my wife and I don't do Valentine's. She's not a gift giver. I could give her gifts all day long and it would not make her very happy. On the other hand, I like to receive gifts and would like to receive more gifts, but there's this space in between. So does that mean that my wife does not care about me receiving gifts and how that might be a way to show love better than something else? No, she can pay attention to that. But the one of the things that I think is most important about the love languages is for me to know about how people that I work with, people I care about, in whatever level of caring, how they show love and affection. Now, I get to show love and affection in any possible way I want to show it. Obviously, at work, affects, touching and things like that are another rule. But the point of that is that if someone shakes hands all the time, I worked in a job at a major oil company medical department where everybody in my group hugged each other when we saw each other. Mm-hmm. That's not a real workplacey thing. However, it was something that we did. It was just how we were, from the boss all the way down. And so there that did happen, but it happened because the boss liked to do that. And I never heard about anybody complaining. But where I go with this thing is that part of it feels very manipulative. Part of it feels like, how should I change how I want to love in order to make you feel love? And so there's some manipulation that I feel, and that's why we're not going to talk too much about it. But I do want you to be aware that these concepts can work in your close relationships in particular, and they also work at the office, because there are people who could care less if you tell him you did a great job today. There are people who could care less that you say, I'm giving you a pay raise. Everybody has different ways of being motivated and being cared for by whoever is their boss. And we do that by paying attention to them. So that's where we get into this space as we move from how we love everybody is to how we demonstrate love to all of those people who are closer to us. Work relationships within families, those kinds of things. So I started out with this book, Making Great Relationships. Rick Hansen has some great books out there. A book called Buddha's Brain that he wrote. You may have heard of that. Neurodharma. He's a Buddhist psychologist, which we see that a lot in the mindfulness community in terms of Buddhists who are also practicing psychotherapists. And Rick Hansen is one of those guys. An interesting part of that book is that he said, space doesn't allow me to discuss in terms of relationships, child rearing, sex, anyway, 4 or 5 other things, but I got the 2 biggies that I think about whenever people have come to see me in terms of marriages. Those are 2 of the big ones right there. Mm-hmm. There are 2 things that come up when they come in for counseling, where there are challenges. And he said, I just didn't have time to talk to you about that because they said I could only have X number of pages. So I said, whew, there's got to be another book. So I called a friend of mine who's the minister in Harlem. I said, you know of a good unity book that talks about romantic relationships? And I'm not, don't worry, I'm not going to talk about sex, and you're right, that's not it. But I wanted to know from her, who is everybody like Fillmore and talking about things in terms of the 19th century instead of the 20th. And this Butterworth book, he's got an entire chapter on sex, which is a powerful thing to talk about from a unity Christian point of view, how we deal with those issues within relationships. And I'm reminded, as I just said, I'm reminded of something Linda Pendergrass periodically did. She would kind of go along and talk, and then she'd say, I've been thinking. And it was like, whenever Linda said, I've been thinking, we were going to go off topic and off in a whole nother place. And this is exactly what happened to me. But my wife talked me down, because at the very beginning of that Life is for Loving book, Butterworth talks about a book by an old-timey guy named Henry Drummond. And that's the guy right there. And this book, this little book, 63-page book, is about Corinthians chapter 13.
Oh, I love that.
It's about Corinthians chapter 13. Now, when you go to Wikipedia, you see Henry Drummond is known as a Scottish or British evangelist. And of course, when we think evangelist, we think fundamentalist Christians, we think about Christian nationalists, we think about, folks who can't, who we may not be able to meet very well in the middle or anywhere. But this guy wrote a book that, except for a little bit of stuff about, just a little bit that's really obviously 19th century, everything he writes about could have been written by a unity person. So in a way, he was being a unity evangelist, which of course is what I always like to tell people. I'm an evangelical unitic. Because what he tells us is how to live according to everything we have in Corinthians. And I decided at some point I was going to read it, so I'm just going to read it right now. You guys may pretend that you're going to go to the reception later and drink some wine or something, because I actually had somebody in one of my churches. I said, this is something that at least in the late 20th century was in just about every single wedding ceremony that was ever done, was 1 Corinthians 13. And he said, I've never heard that before. So maybe didn't go to weddings, I don't know. But one of the things about this is that's so hard is, I said, I'm going to read this because this Drummond thing got me so wound up. And I told my wife this morning at 5 o'clock, I said, I'm changing my talk. And she said, oh my God, yesterday afternoon you showed me the PowerPoint and you said this is what I'm going to do, and now at 5 o'clock in the morning you're going to change it to do something different. And I said, well, I've been thinking. And she said, oh my God. Sounded like Linda. So the point of and she immediately, because she is a Baptist woman that spent a lot of time listening to folks talk about things in Corinthians, because Corinthians is the place where you learn according to the Bible, and there are people who say God said it, I believe it, and that's that this is where we learn that the wife is subject to the husband, and the husband is subject to Christ, and Christ is subject to God. And so, well, just because he said one stupid thing doesn't mean he can't say something smart. I said, that happens to me all the time. You got to understand that. And so where we went with the conversation, of course, is how many times we found something where one verse was immediately followed by another verse that never got mentioned in that patriarchal church that she talked about. As an example, it says the body of the wife belongs to the husband.
Yeah.
And then the very next, in fact, it's not a new sentence. It follows a semicolon, and English teachers could tell us what that means. But what I believe that semicolon means is that this is kind of the same stuff. And so the very next thing, and the husband's body belongs to the wife. So there's none of that conversation about men Oops, I almost said something that could have gone in the wrong place. I'm sorry. Okay, so if I speak in the tongues of mortals and of angels, but do not have love, I'm a noisy gong or clanging cymbal. And if I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith as to remove mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give away all my possessions, and if I hand over my body so that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love is not envious or boastful or arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice in wrongdoing, but rejoices in the truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends. But as for prophecies, they will come to an end. As for tongues, they will cease. As for knowledge, it will come to an end. For we know only in part, and we prophesy only in part. But when the complete comes, when the partial will come to an end, when I was a child, I spoke as a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became an adult, I put an end to childish ways. For now we see in a mirror dimly, but then we will see face to face. Now I know only in part, then I will know fully, even as I have fully known. And now faith, hope, and love abide, these three, and the greatest of these is love. Now, as I said, we heard that whole thing over and over and over again. And basically it says it doesn't matter how smart you are, whether you've got any kind of special spiritual talent, the tongues and all of those things, that absolutely none of that matters. But then it goes on into bits and pieces, and I'm going to talk more about this next week. But, you know, when we talk about the people yelling at the State of the Union, one of the things it says here is love is not rude.
Dang straight.
Love is not rude. I mean, that is that little thing right there. Love is not rude. Now let's bring it into your workplace. Now I've been in male-dominated workplace where rudeness is applauded and a part of the whole the workplace, where we cut each other down, and until you got into the helicopter, there was this whole neat thing that went on. That was a part of the camaraderie. And then we got in a helicopter and expected to work together and all that kind of stuff. And it was male dominated, yes. And the women that worked in that workforce acted the same way. It was a very, very interesting thing to see. But the other one here that I just want to mention briefly, because I think it's one for practice in terms of relationship that's powerful. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. Drummond talks about how people who are quick to temper are often, they're often giving the excuse, well, his daddy was that way. His mom was that way. Some genetic thing that says you get to be a jerk because you inherited this quick temper. Well, that's okay. You know, I've been in rooms where we've got people sitting this far apart, and I'm sitting in the middle trying to figure out how I'm going to get these two human beings to talk. And they're both in this place of, well, you know, and she talks about him getting mad at her. Then the next thing she wants to say is, well, he's always had a quick temper. And you come to the minister and you don't want me to pull out the Bible on you, but right there is this very, very powerful statement that very likely was read at your wedding. That said, you're not supposed to have a temper. You're not supposed to be rude to each other. You're supposed to be kind. You're supposed to be nice to each other. And yet, in our closest relationships, we feel more inclined to be abusive, more inclined to be rude, more inclined to demand our own way. Now, sometimes demanding our own way is something that we have to do. There are people who have allowed the other person in their relationship to get their own way all the time, and that's the expectation in the relationship. And that's hard. But that's not true for most of us. It happens that way. And there are a lot of things that have to be done about that other than just having a quick talk here about love in relationship. So these are the Buddhist psychology ideas that come from, by the way, if you look at all those things about rude and all of the list there, there's actually there are 9 of those. And we have 6 of these, so this is what I was going to talk about first. So here we're back on script. Important ideas about befriending yourself, warming your heart. And part of that comes from practicing being nice to each other and being at peace with others. And being peace and being nice are not necessarily the same thing. We make peace sometimes from a distance, and that's how some relationships need to be. Standing up for yourself with love and from love, not from that place of anger. And so we have to pick our time and our place for standing up for ourselves. And it's probably not when your spouse came home drunk. So we're only going to talk about a couple of things, but when we talk about befriending ourselves, I love this quote from Suzuki Roshi. He said, "You're perfect as you are, and you could use a little improvement." And I love it because oftentimes folks in Unity say, well, you're perfect where you are, you're right where you need to be, everything. And I know that's not true. It may not be true. It's not true from my perspective, from my evaluation of who I am, what I am, and where I am. I maybe want to make changes in my life. And if you tell me I'm perfect, does that mean I'm wrong for wanting to make changes in my life? You know, when I hear about people who say, well, you know, I'm going to start walking more, I'm going to go, you know, take this class, I'm going to study this, do those kinds of things. That is saying not that I'm imperfect, but there are things I want to change and do differently in my life. That implies that you care about yourself and don't need somebody from the outside to just say, you're perfect, don't worry. I like to be affirmed in my desire for change. Wouldn't that be great? Now, if I said I have to change because I'm a terrible, horrible, no good, bad person, that's another space to come from. We're not coming from that place, so don't confuse that concept when we talk about having compassion for ourselves and recognizing that we have plenty of opportunities to change. It was proved to me just as I left the room last week. Yeah. There's opportunity for change, and I don't want to be that person. I don't want to show up that way. Whoops, there was one other thing in there. The idea about living from the big picture when we're in relationship. We'll get a couple of those specific things that are challenging in my house. But when we think about the big picture, there may be something that annoyed you. And you say something about that annoyance. And then there's something said about what you said about the annoyance. And then we might get into a place where there's the tone that you express that annoyance in. Yeah. And then we get to something I read about today in the Washington Post. Oh. This lady is a journalist and wrote a book about conflict. Well, she said to the editor of the book, she wanted to go find something that was working in Congress. And he says, well, you got to, I don't care if you're going off on this little fairy tale thing, you know, what windmill you're going to go look for. So he says, you still got a deadline. And it's the same. It doesn't change because you're looking for a unicorn. And she found a committee in Congress that worked from Biden's inauguration until just recently, and they have amazing results. Now it's this little tiny goofy committee that just talks about how to modernize Congress or something like that. So it's not, one of those big things about, deciding to spend money in Ukraine or not and all that kind of stuff. But when the chairman, the chairperson, and the other thing is it's exactly equal. So there's no majority or minority on the thing. And so but they did little things, and think about how little these things are, but how important they are. When they had witnesses come in, nobody sat on a dais.
A what?
A dais where, when you look at committee meetings, all the senators are all up here and they all got microphones in front of them, and Republicans on one side, Democrats on the other, and the chairman and ranking member are there. And then back here, these people are sitting down and they're looking up at the people who are conducting these interviews. They sat at a table. And when you sit down with people that are witnesses, you altered that relationship. These people are not testifying before Congress. They're having a conversation about issues and, oh my God, solutions. So the reason I pointed out that guy standing up at that work table is he altered the dynamic, a physical dynamic. He was a man, the forceful dynamic, standing in front of women who are generally smaller and perhaps less combative, or they could be just as combative. That was silly. But the fact is that these people were sitting at a table and he decided to stand up. And so what she discovered, and the name of her book, is that the conflict became the point, or what had been the point. So these people got to a place where they were not having conflict because there was no way to make a point of the conflict. They didn't speak for 5 minutes like they do in every single that you could show on this network or that network. They just asked questions. There was no speech for 5 minutes like we allow in every other thing. So in the questioning, we're able to get to a place where we're looking for solutions rather than a place of grandstanding. And when she talked about the conflict, I will tell you right now, there it is. There it is. Anybody have dishwasher conflicts in their house? Anybody ever had a dishwasher conflict in their house? Because there are those of us who believe there's a right way and a wrong way to load a dishwasher. There's a right way and a wrong way to load a dishwasher. And if the dishwasher's loaded like this, with all the glasses being up, right side up and filling up with water. Now, anybody who knows my wife, you know that she has no trouble being forceful and responsive. And her question to me when I said, "Why did you do this?" which may have been very early in our relationship. Might have been, yeah. And why did you do this? And I said, well, the dishes are going to be filled with water. It'll be nasty water. There'll be food in there. There'll be just, and she said, okay. And I said, well, what are you going to do about it? Her question is, who's loading the dishwasher? So in terms of personal responsibility, who's loading the dishwasher? Now, she did say damn dishwasher, and that did perhaps alter that conflict a little bit different. But the fact is that what she's telling me is that I loaded the dishwasher. Now, after a year or two of having resentments over the dishwasher, which is just no way to live with someone, I said, do you mind if I change how dishes are in the dishwasher? And she said, no, I don't mind at all. Just don't tell me that they're wrong. So here's the deal.
That's exactly what we did.
It just, whose love?
Exactly,
I've
that's
done that too.
exactly the
And
solution.
think about all these little things that can cause problems, because we'll talk about, I'll talk about that in just a minute. I want to finish this. The whole idea of taking care of your side of the street. My wife has a friend, a high-paid attorney, and he got sick to death of another attorney not carrying his load. This guy was not working as hard as this person thought. So you know what he did? He quit. He quit his job. And then he goes looking for a job, finds a job at half pay. And so rather than, there are going to be people who just annoy you to no end. And unless they're bullying you or sexually harassing you or doing any of those things, they're just folks who are at your job, and you may have to have some relationship with them, but we got to really think about what's going on our side of the street. If I want to be in a positive relationship with my spouse, I take care of my stuff. And when there's things where those things cross over, we should have conversation. Okay. Now, back to that idea about, I come from a family where right and wrong is life and death. And I have been in arguments over nothing that felt like life and death. Now, as you guys can hear, I speak fairly loudly. And this is when I'm being nice. And when I'm not being so nice, or I get upset about the question of who's loading the dishwasher, like, oh, well, hold up. There's a right way and wrong, and I go to that space and I talk louder and louder and louder. Yeah. Because obviously you didn't hear me.
You don't hear me.
And when we do that in relationship, what have we done?
Great conflict.
Exactly right. And then where does it go? It goes to the conversation about the conflict, not the conversation about the issue at hand, which could calmly be taken care of. Do you mind if I reload the dishwasher? Because it became about, you talk to me loudly. You made me feel less than, and that's was not my intention. I don't know what the heck my intention was. I thought it should be loaded differently. But the point of that is just what we heard. It becomes about the conflict, not about the issue at hand, which means partly that taking things personally is huge for us. As humans, we don't want to feel attacked. My wife didn't want to be attacked about the way she loaded the dishwasher, which was, by the way, not that bad. It was bad, but not that. But it wasn't like the whole world was going to come to an end. But it was personal to me that she wouldn't listen to me. Now, think about for a moment what's important about being heard in your relationship. There are a lot of things that are important. And for me, one of the things Bobby has taught me is, I've been married before, she'd been married before. And she said, the most important thing is the relationship. And we talk about individual boundaries and respect and all those things, but it's respect within the relationship. And the relationship doesn't survive if people are not respected. It doesn't survive if we don't take care of ourselves and stand up for ourselves in relationship. But if it becomes all about standing up for yourself and not standing up for yourself within the relationship, then the relationship may not be able to survive. I can't say exactly when that line is passed, but certainly in my experience, in my own personal experience, of making mistakes, I can promise you that that's a key element of this. And it's just like when you work on a team at work. The team is important, but even beyond that, when we're talking about teaching, you know, my daughter has talked to me about issues in her teaching team. And she said the problem is everybody wants their own thing to be recognized, and they don't have any loyalty to the kids, which is the point of having a darn teaching team to begin with, and having conversation about that part of the issue. And of course, there's a lot of accusations about folks from the state and the district and every other place that doesn't care about the kids either. So, but it's another topic for us to consider, another point. Speaking wisely comes back to what I said about the fact that can become in an argument, whether you're at work or with your children, it's how you talk. It's your tone of voice. That idea about watching the words you use. Softer tone. And that softer tone is a really hard thing for some of us. In the Seiler house, it was just loud. There were 5 children, 2 adults. Occasionally, maybe there were 7 children and no adults. I don't know. In every house I've ever lived in, there tends to be sometimes everybody's acting like kids. But what happens in there was everybody was pretty loud. And it's, my children are kind of that way as well. And folks get the wrong idea that they may be fussing when what they're doing is talking. So it's a real hard thing for us to deal with, but it's essential when you're at a point where you're in a challenge in your relationships. So it's a big thing for us to think about. And the last piece of this is something that I learned from in 12 steps, and it's the 10th step, and it says we continued to take inventory, and when we were wrong, we promptly admitted it. So the whole idea is that for me, every evening I think about anything that I may have done inappropriately, and usually folks don't even notice, and I'll say, geez, I'm sorry about this. And that I wish I hadn't said this way or done it something, and it's critical for me, and it's important for me, and whether or not people acknowledge it, that really doesn't matter. But to do this in our relationships, imagine being at work, and I have done this, where I had a meeting with someone, and it got a little upsetting, and I was pretty upset. And right on the edge of putting on somebody on a performance improvement plan, and it was just kind of tough. And I said, and the next morning, I told them about it, that I really, I apologize for the direction that the meeting went. And that person immediately went to my boss and said, he can't figure out what he's trying to do here. He got upset here, and then so I explained to my boss that it doesn't matter. I will apologize if I think I've done something wrong to somebody. He tried to teach me about strength and things like that. I just said, that's okay. We'll handle it this way. That's also difficult to see your side of the situation, because when you take that conversation and it turns into conflict, who turned it into conflict? Frankly, it's usually me. It's usually me that turned it into conflict. That's where that apology has to come in. Occasionally, you may hear, "Don't 10-step me." If you happen to be hanging around with somebody that's in that place. So what I'd like to do now, I don't even know what time it is. Oh, a little long today. I'd like to do now is for us to get quiet for a minute. Actually, you guys have been quiet for a long time. And I'd like for you to consider, as you sit with your eyes closed, if you're comfortable or not, just try not to focus. Get your breathing going on. Doesn't have to be deep breaths, just notice it. How that breathing goes in, goes out, and acknowledge the fact that it just goes on. You don't have to be in charge. Your heart beats, you breathe, it happens. I'd like for you to consider a recent challenge you may have had in a relationship. As you consider that challenge, I'd like for you to picture that challenge in your mind's eye, how that interaction went. And that interaction may have ended up in loud words or unkind words. It may have ended up with slamming doors or leaving the space. You remember how that felt. Now I'd like to rewind. We can rewind slowly, just back from the slamming door, the unkind words that were spoken by either person. And we move back to the very beginning of the interaction. If possible, go to the place where there was actually peace in the relationship before that interaction. Now, from that place of peace, think about the love you have for that person, or how much you care about that person in the workplace, how important they are to you. The interaction may have begun from you or from the other person, but imagine how that begins. Whether from you or that other person, while you are holding that image of love and care. You can say to yourself, I love you. And as the interaction heats up between whatever words you choose to say to yourself, I love you. I care about you. I hope you're well. I hope you can live in peace. Let's just continue for a few minutes considering what that interaction looks like. We're grateful for the opportunity to use our God-given power of imagination to see things in different ways, to make a commitment to ourselves, to see things differently, to see things rightly. As we return to this room, consider some of the things we heard today and make a decision to begin to practice love. Love every day. Everyday love. Amen.
So we're going to gather now for our closing prayers. We're going to sing a song, the peace song, and
We can all go up here.
yes, and then our prayer for protection.
Let there be peace on earth, and let it begin with me. Let there be peace on earth, the peace that was meant to be. With God as creator, in oneness all are we. Let us walk with each other in perfect harmony. Let peace begin with me. Let this be the moment now. With every step I take, let this be my joyous vow. To take each moment and live each moment in peace eternally. Let there be peace on earth, and let it begin with me. The light of God surrounds us, the love of God enfolds us, the power of God protects us, the presence of God watches over us. Wherever we are, God is, and